The sexual assault case against whistleblower Julian Assange in Sweden shows signs of unravelling. A crucial piece of evidence brought forward by one of the accusers produced no forensic results. RT's Polly Bodko is in London with the details.
Two laboratories in Sweden were unable to find traces of Julian Assange's DNA on a condom that was submitted by one of these two women that's accused him of sexual assault. Now, lawyers for Julian Assange say that that's because the condom submitted could be a fake. Julian Assange has always denied any wrongdoing. He says that he's innocent and that he had consensual sex with both women. Now, the laboratories that were searching for his DNA did find traces of his DNA on another condom submitted by the second woman that's accused him, but it's turning into a rather farcical situation because the report says that that particular woman that accused Julian Assange, she says that he sexually assaulted her by refusing to wear a condom. So there's a lot of holes in this story, it looks like, and Julian Assange says that he's happy to face questioning by the Swedish investigators if they were to question him over in London, where he's currently residing in the Ecuadorian embassy, because he says that the Swedish authorities aren't able to give him any guarantees that he won't be extradited over to the USA on trumped-up charges that he says are politically motivated.
Well, for more on this, I can now turn to Peter Tatchell. He's a human rights campaigner joining me live in London. Will these latest developments make any difference to Julian Assange's plight?
Probably not, but they are very disturbing and perplexing. After all, the condom DNA evidence was supposed to be the killer evidence that would put Julian Assange in the dock. Now that we've found that there is no DNA on one of these condoms from one of the alleged victims, it rather calls into question a substantial element of the case against him.
In other words, this case has no foundation, it's a stitch-up, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I think Julian, I'm a great supporter of WikiLeaks, and I think they did a great public service in exposing US wrongdoing. But I do think he does have a case to answer. Allegations have been made. These are serious allegations. And as Julian has always said, he is willing to answer the prosecutors, and if they are so concerned, as they ought to be, about these allegations of sexual assault, they ought to be willing to come to London to interview him. After all, Swedish prosecutors have previously gone overseas to interview suspects involved in quite serious crimes, as well as lesser ones. And if they've done that before, if they've interviewed people abroad before, why can't they do it in this case? The fact that the Swedish authorities are not willing to come to London and have delayed and excused themselves time and time again doesn't indicate that they really take these allegations seriously, because a serious prosecutor would want to interview Julian Assange as quickly as possible by any necessary means. And certainly, his opportunity and his willingness to be interviewed in London has been on the table for over a year, yet it's not been taken up by the Swedish prosecutors.
Well, of course, the reason why he doesn't want to go to Sweden, of course, is that he thinks that'll be the next step to extradition to the US, where he claims he could face the death penalty there. Is he manipulating this into a human rights issue, or does he have a real point?
I think Julian Assange does have legitimate concerns about the possibility of extradition to the United States once he goes to Sweden. That isn't, a done deal, but it's a possibility. And certainly, if the British and Swedish governments were serious, I would have thought that they would have been willing to give cast-iron guarantees that if he did go to Sweden, under no circumstances would he be extradited to the United States. That would be another way to ensure that Julian could go to Sweden and be interviewed by the prosecutors.
But is really the death penalty an issue here? I mean, it's not likely he would actually face the death penalty in the US, is it?
Well, there have been a number of leading politicians in the United States who have called for him to be put on trial for espionage and said he warrants the death penalty. Now, I agree, they are a fringe minority. And in theory, of course, espionage does carry the death penalty. More likely, he'd be facing perhaps 50-plus years in prison. Still, I think an unjustified punishment for a man who did what the American Constitution enshrined, that is, that government should be by the people, of the people, and for the people. The people of the United States have a right to know what their government is doing in their name. And thanks to Julian Assange, we know that the US government was doing a lot of very bad things that it kept hidden from the American people and indeed the people of the world.
And just very briefly, the consequences he's had to face as a result of that meant that he's now holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. WikiLeaks is under financial blockade. What message does this send to you? You're a human rights activist. What alarm bells, what sort of message does that send to you when we think of his predicament?
Well, of course, Julian Assange has his human rights. The women in Sweden who accuse him of sexual assault, they have their human rights. The United States government, in my view, is abusing its rights and prerogatives by seeking to put both Julian Assange and indeed right now Bradley Manning, the US military personnel who has been accused of leaking to WikiLeaks. I think the US is abusing its right and power. What it wants to do is to keep certain things secret, certain things about US, in some cases US war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. It wants to keep them secret. And that is not in line with the principles and values of the American Constitution, let alone international human rights law.
Peter Tatchell, human rights activist and the director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, joining us live in London. We appreciate you joining us here on RT. Thank you.